Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to speak on the topic, and I understand this is not a topic that you've taken up so far, so wasn't quite sure where to begin. But I'm going to go through some of the basics of my understanding of it, talk about what criminalization is, what some of the negative consequences are for persons who are homeless as well as for the community as a whole, and then at the end I'll have an ask, because you're not an advocate, you should have an ask. So, I'm from the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission views homelessness as a violation of the fundamental human right to housing. We're guided by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is written right into the city ordinance that establishes the commission. And as a human rights advocate, I tend to look at homelessness in terms of two major challenges that we have. The first one being much of what I hear talked about here, that is meeting the need for adequate emergency shelter, for transitional housing, for permanent housing, case management services that people may need. That's one challenge. That's a huge challenge. The second challenge that I see, this is interrelated, in some ways interdependent with the first challenge, is ending the criminalization of homelessness, wherein people who are unhoused or cited or even arrested for carrying out necessary life-sustaining activities in public space. Now, the first challenge, as I mentioned, is something that is being worked on quite a bit. Criminalization is not. So I want to speak to the importance of making criminalization a priority focus of this field. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on statistics. You know that there's a very high percentage of our homeless population is unsheltered. And Brian has written a guest viewpoint in the Register Guard on this topic. And people who are unsheltered, for the most part, must conduct their life-sustaining activities in public space. They often have no choice but to sit and lie, eat, sleep, and even relieve themselves in places where they're observed by others. And in Eugene and many other communities around the country, city ordinances and policies turn these life-sustaining activities into violations of the law, leading to citations and fines, even arrests and jail. Let me give you just a few examples of the kinds of laws and policies here in Eugene that have this consequence. The no camping ordinance is probably one of the biggest ones. Camping is basically illegal in Eugene except in those places that are designated, specifically designated by the city, such as the recently created rest stops or Opportunity Village Eugene. And so you have no camping signs posted throughout the parks, and if you are, there's a state law that says you must have a 24-hour warning, which is not always observed. But if you are asked to leave and do not leave, you can be cited. There are also some no trespassing signs in the parks. And if you violate a no trespassing sign, you can be subject to arrest and jail. So these are the kinds of things that begin to help create a criminal record for people who are homeless and have no other place to go but to self-shelter in the parks or other places. We have a car camping ordinance, which makes it illegal to sleep or camp within your car, except again in very designated and limited places. People who violate the car camping ordinance and willfully do not remove their vehicle from an illegal spot can have their vehicle towed to a tow yard and must then pay for the towing fee, for the storage fee, plus the fine that they have to pay to the city. And they have a record of violation. We have a urination and defecation ordinance, which makes it illegal to urinate or defecate in public, and of course people who are unsheltered and homeless often do not have access to bus stops, restrooms, and there's a shortage of public restrooms, and many of these are not necessarily open from 24/7. So that's a citable offense with a fine. We have policies that are administered by the police department. One is called the letter of trespass consent. If a business signs a letter of trespass consent, whether the business is open or not, if someone is on that property and the police officer asks the person to leave and the person does not leave, that person can be cited for trespassing and can be arrested. So if they're sleeping or sheltering themselves in the rain. We also have something called a sidewalk use permit, which I think is being pulled back. But this allows businesses to obtain permits to extend their rights to do business, to include the sidewalk in front of their establishment. And all that need mean is they can put out a sailor sign. And if people sit there to rest, or just simply stand there, they can be charged with trespass, which is an arrestable offense. And there are other things involving dog licensing. There's a lot of different ways people get caught up in trouble. The EPD and city officials, who I speak a lot with these folks, argue that these laws and policies are not aimed at people who are homeless, that they're neutral and that they apply to all. It's said that these are aimed at curbing behaviors on the part of anyone, behaviors that violate the law. And there's a certain truth to that as well. However, in practice, the enforcement of these laws and policies has a disparate impact on the unsheltered homeless. People who have no safe and legal place to be are much more likely to be forced to camp or to car camp in an illegal public space where they're going to be noticed and they're going to be cited. The unsheltered homeless are also the ones who have no private bathrooms and have no money to pay a restaurant, buy something in a restaurant so they can really use the restrooms. They're the ones who are likely to be on the street at all hours of the day and night and be subject to, vulnerable to, trespass policies that local businesses can invoke. So not only is the human right to housing being violated, but so are the human rights to personal security, to freedom from discrimination, to health, and to dignity. And these are the kinds of things that the Human Rights Commission is very much concerned with. If you don't hear anything else I talk about, listen to the negative consequences, because I think these are the things that have to move people, public officials, policymakers, and so forth, to address criminalization. And the consequences are for people who are unhoused, but also for the larger community. First of all, this approach is ineffective in that it does not reduce homelessness. However, it does increase the sense of marginalization, the sense of anxiety, the sense of depression on the part of those people to whom this is being applied. I mean, just imagine you have no source of income and you're fined $600 for doing something that you had absolutely no choice to do in public space because you have another place to go do this. And that happens to you again and again and again. Warrants come out for your arrest, people show up, and you accumulate quite a criminal record without really having done anything except try to survive. So it's ineffective. It's also a very expensive misuse of the time and specialized training of the Eugene Police Department, who taxpayers expect to prevent and solve crimes. In fact, it's an extremely expensive endeavor. There's studies done in at least 3 different communities in the United States where it was found to cost 3 times as much to deal with people who are on the streets, with police, with emergency department, with courts, with jailing, and so forth, as it would be just to simply give them an apartment and a case manager. So it's a very expensive proposition to take a law enforcement approach as opposed to what the ideal would be, which would be taking a housing first approach. Criminalization leaves people who are homeless with criminal records that are needed for this, that can make it even more difficult for them to access or be eligible for jobs or housing or certain government assistance programs. When people who are homeless accumulate criminal records, these records can serve as an impediment to the achievement of fair housing and to the exercise of fair housing choice. And I know that may be part of the consolidated plan, I'm not sure, but that's being worked on. And I really do think that recognizing homelessness and the criminalization of homelessness in terms of creating criminal records as an impediment to fair housing is very important. Because also in that same report, you have to talk about how you're going to overcome that particular impediment. So that to me is something that's critical.
Ken, pardon me 1 second, Mr. Chair. I'm afraid I need to leave to chair an audit committee meeting, and Ken has let me know he will forward the rest of his notes to me, and I apologize for that.
Thank you, Pat.
There's also data indicating that communities that criminalize homelessness have higher rates of violent hate crimes committed against people who are unsheltered and unhoused. And then the last negative outcome that I'll mention is that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is considering reducing the points awarded to proposals for funding from applicants that are not implementing alternatives to criminalization. And this, of course, will harm the entire community. I mean, I heard stuff you talk about cutbacks and limits on fundings and so forth. You certainly can't afford in this community in Maine County to be put in a second place position with regard to funding proposals because we're not addressing the criminalization issue. So I think I speak on behalf of the Human Rights Commission in expressing deep concern over the harm being done by criminalization to individuals that it most directly affects those who are unhoused, as well as the way in which it is creating problems for the community. And so what I'd like to do is ask today, not whether your bylaws allow you to vote on these things or not, even if I got a motion in a second. Ask today that the board establish an ad hoc task force to, 1, examine criminalization and its effects in Maine County, and 2, recommend viable alternatives to criminalization and strategies for their implementation. How much time do I have?
About 10 minutes.
Okay.
May I add one thing? The city of Portland, many of us travel there, and they have very different rules surrounding what is criminal behavior and what isn't regarding homelessness, sleeping, etc. So I encourage a comparison of what they're doing versus what we're doing.
Well, if there's a task force, that's it.
Exactly.
I'll just give you a couple of examples of what some alternative kinds of things are that could be considered. And obviously, there's the somehow modifying the extent to which there's places for people to go and sleep and camp, if not be a shelter. People have also talked about suspending or modifying the camping ban during the extreme winter weather to let people who are safely camped, who are not going to be harmed by what's happening around them, be there on those, at least on those nights when the Beacon Warming Center might be open. A citation, dismissal, or diversion program for people who are homeless or who have been homeless. Perhaps this could be set up in conjunction with Judge Allen's planned community court. And the purpose of this would be to erase the record of minor infractions so that people who would be able to go for a job would be able to go without necessarily having a long string of everything from defecating outdoors to sleeping in parks blocks or whatever. A county-wide ban. These are just brainstorming ideas. I'm not proposing that these must be implemented. A county-wide ban-the-box ordinance that would prohibit private employers or landlords from asking criminal history questions on initial applications for jobs or housing. And this has been implemented up in Seattle. I think they just implemented the jobs piece of it January 1st. They've had the housing piece of it for 3 years. Well, maybe I'll just stop there. I want to leave time for questions or comments. But I did make my ask, and we'll deal with that.
Any questions for Ken? Hugh.
Ken, do you know of any other agency besides this one, in a body that could do this, that has a public official working? No, let me rephrase the question. Who would this, if we decided to do this, who would we partner with? It would be Eugene Human Rights Commissioners and the city and the county?
When you say this, do you mean the task force?
Yeah.
The task force, yeah, the task force.
I think you all would have to decide that. I left out the very last sentence, which is that I feel so strongly about this that I would volunteer to serve on the task force.
We'd expect that, Ken.
I know you would. So that would have the Human Rights Commission there.
Yeah.
But I think obviously, I don't really know what goes on with regard to criminalization in Springfield or at the county level. It might be a totally different kind of picture. But we certainly would want representatives from all three of the jurisdictions to kind of sort out what's going on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yes.
So, Ken, thank you for your presentation. I guess one of the questions that I have, and then I've got a couple of comments, is if you have any sense of how these ordinances are being applied and kind of what the outcomes are, or is that part of the ask, is to actually do that research?
I think we could gather some of that from city staff. Like Kenneth is sitting over there. We could probably pull together some information on the actual some numbers.
Because I think that would be really helpful to inform, what the level of the issue is here locally. And secondly, you talk about the implications of the criminal histories, and I would take it even a step further. So for those people who do commit more than just minor infractions that wind up with, felony convictions on their records, there are severe implications, lifelong implications, to their ability to access housing and employment. And one of the things that I think we haven't figured out is how do we give people credit for a life well lived? At what point do we say, okay, you've been out of the system for 10, 15, 20 years, you've turned your life around, yet you still have that conviction from 1984, or whenever it is, and you apply for an apartment in the funkiest part of Eugene, and that question is on the box. And regarding the Ban the Box initiatives, the city of Eugene passed the Ban the Box here locally. There's legislation that is going in this session for a statewide Ban the Box, and it would just apply to government agencies. But what you're talking about is much broader. We're talking about how not only does local government model for the private sector what we want to see them doing, but how can we either incentivize or mandate that the private sector not set these onerous barriers for people, which I think is a tough question, not an easy thing to do.
I'm interested to see what they do up in Seattle.
You have any questions for Ken? Go ahead.
Are you looking at or thinking that in the future the city of Eugene might be it would be possible to ask the city to change some of its laws so that police officers don't sort of have the right to cite homeless people who are camping on public property? Or is that way in the future?
We've been struggling with that question. I mean, we've been asking for the city of Eugene for the city manager to do an assessment of all the policies, regulations, and ordinances, and so forth in terms of how they impact people and come up with some suggestions for solutions. So it's from outside you can ask what people decide that they want to do and how it fits in with political environment and so forth is another question. But our job as a commission is to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's what we do.
I was going to say, we appreciate our commission, but I also want to say that after the Occupy, and then we had the Mayor's Committee, and the recommendations came out of the Mayor's Committee, the way the council has gone about it is to sort of take one step at one of those recommendations at a time. And so the first one they went out on was, which took a long time, was the village, and then the rest stops and so forth. And so they just really have not even come close yet to wanting to examine the laws. That was one of the recommendations that council has not, at least to this point, chosen to give the manager any direction in that.
Just kind of bring us back to the first couple of meetings we had where we all talked about being an action-oriented committee, and I'll just resurface the concern that I've mentioned a couple of times, that the more committees and task force that we create, we dilute our ability to put resources resources on the ground to address homelessness in our community, and I absolutely am not speaking against what you're trying to make happen, but part of it for me is I feel like this is a committee that's about putting units on the ground, about creating more resources and more tools in our toolbox, and I don't want us to lose that focus. So for me, this is a legislative issue, frankly. So I would advocate that the legislative committee takes this on as opposed to creating a separate committee or task force. But the idea of people being able, so law enforcement and other folks needed the ability to address people that are urinating, defecating, or sleeping in areas that aren't appropriate. And people shouldn't have that baggage hang with them for very long. So there needs to be a quick and easy way to wipe the slate clean. And I would hope that that could get handled by the legislature.
Anything else? Mayor Pearson?
Wearing my role on this committee from the city of Jean, I would say that, and paying attention to what you just said, and maybe this is a legislative committee, or this committee can simply ask the city of Eugene to address this issue.
I think that seems like a great idea.
And you have a fair amount of muscle in this group, so I would say that would give me something to take back to say this group discussed this and they wish you to address it. You're not telling them how to address it. You're just saying it's significant enough that you think they need to take a look at it. And if that's what you want to do, that I can take that message back to the city, and I'm sure they will painfully look at me, but nonetheless,
Wouldn't it be better for us
that's my job.
to ask all three entities, Springfield, Eugene, and Lynn County, each take a look at this issue?
I think that would be fair too.
So I would make a motion to that effect, to
And I'll
ask
second.
the three entities to put this on their agenda, to devote a work session to it,
How about a report back?
and report back, yeah.
We have a second, should we bring this up for a vote, or some of those letters? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I would also support the idea that the legislative committee would be the appropriate group. I hate trying to form another committee to ask the legislative committee to maybe monitor that and assist in any way that they can with that process.
Mayor Pearson?
So if I would just add to that, a formal letter from this group would be helpful.
We'll get one between me and the staff, we'll get something drafted and make sure that that's, we hit all the points that we need to hit, and then we'll get that submitted. Is there a certain timeline you'd like this in, as opposed to, I know tomorrow would probably be good, but realistically, a timeline you'd like us to?
As soon as you can.
Okay. We will do that. Okay. Any more questions for Ken? We're at the end of the meeting. It sounds like we've got one of our first marching orders is to get